And you can get online, you can see me, but also Tim Shipman, the Sunday Times' chief political commentator. Tim, how are you?
I'm allowed to say I'm a little bit excited. It's like the first game of the World Cup.
It's like a whole new season. There's
Exactly.
a new character's been introduced to this long-running series.
Absolutely. And like a lot of opening matches of the World Cup, if it ends in a rather dull draw, it wouldn't be a surprise. But equally, you know, if things go right, this is the lineup for the next general election, and we're going to see them probing and attacking and trying to find weak spots, seeing if they can come up with slogans, seeing if they can find out what upsets the other one, and it's going to be quite intriguing.
Well, lots of you already online on YouTube watching along. Good afternoon from Cape Town, says Craig. I've made a strong coffee for this session as a precaution. Morning from Maidavale, says Johnny. Hi from Taunton, says Stephen. Nice, always from Taunton. Ollie, hello from Bedford. Will Starmer make a disgrace to a pork market joke? Richard is in Plymouth. Says Mrs. Mercer's not very happy with the new PM. That's Johnny Mercer's wife.
She is not, no.
She's not happy. Good morning from upstate New York, says Candia. So get online. Go to YouTube. Search Times Radio. You can listen along on Times Radio. You can watch along live on YouTube. This is proper, you know, if you're into politics, this is what you're here for. It's probably political history. Liz Truss's first PMQs. We will pause the action live and analyse the key exchanges in real time. It's PMQs Unpacked is next on Times Radio.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
It's 12 o'clock. I'm Matt Chorley and this is Times Radio. In a moment, PMQs Unpacked, but first the headlines this lunchtime. Liz Truss has just received a big cheer as she arrived in the House of Commons for her first Prime Minister's questions. It follows a brutal cabinet reshuffle which saw her allies rewarded and supporters of Rishi Sunak sacked. The new Prime Minister has promised to set the country on the path to long-term success, with a major support package for energy bills expected to be announced tomorrow. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin has described the process of Liz Truss becoming Prime Minister as far from democratic. He was speaking at an economic forum in Russia. In other news, footballer Ryan Giggs says he's disappointed that he'll have to face a retrial over allegations of assault and controlling behaviour. Last week, jurors in the first trial were dismissed after failing to reach a verdict. He denies the charges. And Chelsea Football Club have sacked their head coach Thomas Tuchel. The club's new American ownership says it's the right time to make the transition, 100 days since they took over. We'll also have more news throughout the day here on Times Radio. But right now, it's time for this.
PMQs Unpacked on Times Radio.
Order. I call Matt Chorley and Tim Shipman.
Yeah, Tim Shipman, the Sunday Times chief political commentators in the studio with me. It's a big... Why does PMQs matter so much? Lots of people say this is all Westminster bubble nonsense. What we care about is energy bills and cost of living crisis. Why are we worried about this Punch and Judy show?
Well, if you stick around for half an hour, I don't think you're going to be short of cost of living stuff. That's point one. Point two is that this is the parliamentary bear pit where the leaders are tested. And don't forget, you know, it was a bunch of Westminster nonsense that got rid of Boris Johnson. Stuff he was doing, the way his team responded to it, and then the lack of faith that his side had in him, and that's what did for him in the end. And you know, PMQs is a way of measuring that support, what's going on behind the people, how much enthusiasm have they actually generated, and having their arguments tested and their performance tested. It's like a sort of weekly MOT for leaders on both sides, and it can tell you quite a lot about the state of politics. Yes, some of it is ephemeral rubbish, and that may even be the fun bits, but... you know, it's important.
It all plays in. Yeah. It all plays in. Well, we could, because it's such a big, it's a big day, first day of term for lots of these new ministers. So Lindsay Hoyle, Common Speaker, kicks things off. Let's take a listen.
I'd also like to take this opportunity to welcome the new Prime Minister to her place. And I know she will ensure that any statements will be made in the House first. We now come to number one. And we start with Paul Hamilton. Paul, let's up. Question number one.
Liz Truss, here she comes.
Mr. Speaker, I'm honoured to take my place as Prime Minister in this House. and to take on responsibility at a vital time for our country. I am determined to deliver for everybody across our United Kingdom. I will work constructively with all members of this House to tackle the challenges we face. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
So there she is, making a debut. I think it's fair to say that Lindsay Hoyle completely forgot where he was then and didn't know who he was calling.
Or indeed what their name was. But apart from that, it's all going very well. Liz Truss looking, she looks quite pleased, doesn't she?
A navy blue jacket and I
wondered if you do the clothes.
Well, I mean,
it's not quite Margaret Thatcher, but it's a sort of Maggie type look.
It's a white jacket, white shirt with a sort of, I don't know what collar that.
A blouse, I think we call it when it's the ladies.
A frilly collar.
A little bit frilly, but the hair has been arranged with a scalpel. It's all very controlled. The hair is the anti-Boris Johnson.
Yes, very much so. And sitting to her left.
Anyway, let's hope there's some substance to talk about,
woman,
not just this ephemera.
Theresa Coffey, the Deputy Prime Minister.
The Deputy Prime Minister and Health Secretary.
Impossible to overstate how close they are.
Well, I mean, they've sung karaoke together more often than you and I have, and that is saying something.
And significant. And this is, when we go hear from Keir Starmer in just a moment, but it's a significant, Labour constantly have this problem that they've only ever had a man as leader.
And I rather suspect we might hear about that at some point. Yes, the Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister are women, and the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Home Secretary are not white. And the Tories, at least in recent times, have done rather better on this than the Labour Party. And that is not something lost on quite a lot of members of the Labour Party.
OK, here we go then. This is what we're all here for, the main event of PMQs Unpacked, where we pause the action live from the House of Commons to analyse in real time what is going on, listening along live on Times Radio, watching along live on the Times Radio YouTube channel. This is question number 1 from Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I congratulate the Prime Minister on her appointment? When she said in her leadership campaign that she was against windfall taxes, did she mean it?
Yeah. Very good.
Well, I thank the right honourable gentleman for his welcome. I hope that we will be able to work together, particularly on areas we agree on. And I know that we have had strong support from the opposition in opposing Vladimir Putin's appalling war in Ukraine. And I want us to continue to stand up to that appalling Russian aggression that has led to the energy crisis we face now. I am against a windfall tax. I believe it is the wrong thing to be putting companies off investing in the United Kingdom just when we need to be growing the economy.
Well, let's jump in there. I mean, given that the main complaint normally from listeners is the questions never answered, that was a very straightforward. Do you still oppose a windfall tax?
Yes, she does. And that was an interesting one because I know there were some Tories who wondered if she might give ground on that. Don't forget, a month ago, she wasn't in favour of doing a sort of big bazooka on energy prices either. And at some point in the not too distant future, Keir Starmer is going to point out that he was the first to say that we should freeze the energy price. Truss is going to have to embrace that, but it's very clear that one of the ways she's going to pay for it is not a windfall tax. And there was some, even some Tories wondered if she would have to give ground on that. So that's nice and clear. In both her answers so far, in the opening and there, stressing the desire to work together, one suspects that will be honoured more in the breach than the observance. But new Prime Ministers always like to sort of say that they're happy to work across the House.
I mean, it's fair to say it wasn't the most fulsome welcome from Keir Starmer.
Yeah, there was a sort of dead silence straight after it, where everybody wondered if he was going to say anything more about fortitude or something.
Even she acknowledged, she just thank you for your words, not even warm words,
which they would have prepared in advance that she would thank him for his words. And then she probably was. If she had a more fulsome thanks, she curtailed that pretty fast.
It's also worth pointing out, in terms of all of all these things matter. The presentation will have been very carefully thought out. Sitting to Liz Truss's right-hand side is Penny Mordaunt, who is the new
Leader of the House of Commons. So that's why she's sitting there, because that is where the Leader of the House of Commons sits, with the Chief Whip one seat further along. So I don't think we can necessarily draw the conclusion that is a sign of how close Mordaunt is to the centre of power.
But it is visually we
But
are seeing a
visually,
very
it is a
different.
good
And
visual.
she was a very popular.
She was.
Leadership contender. And then just to the other side of Theresa Coffey, you've got Kwasi Kwarteng, the new Chancellor. And then you go, I think Suella Braverman there, the Home Secretary, then the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly. It's a
all
very
women
different...
and non-white men.
Yeah.
There's not a non-white man in sight. There's not a white man in sight. Right?
There's a white... The first white man on the front bench, I think, is Alistair Jack.
Who, as everybody knows, is the Secretary of State for Scotland.
Thank you very much, Tim. Right, let's go back. Right, the hit rate so far is quite good. One question, one answer. Let's see if this continues. Let's go back to the House of Commons. It's Keir Starmer.
Mr Speaker, thank you for that answer. I ask because the Treasury estimates are that the energy producers will make £170 billion in excess profits over the next 2 years. The Prime Minister knows she's no choice but to back an energy price freeze. But it won't be cheap, and the real choice, the political choice, is who is going to pay. Is she really telling us that she's going to leave these vast excess profits on the table and make working people foot the bill for decades to come?
Well, I understand that people across our country are struggling with the cost of living and they're struggling with their energy bills. And that is why I, as Prime Minister, will take immediate action to help people with the cost of their energy bills. And I will be making an announcement to this House on that tomorrow and giving people certainty to make sure that they are able to get through this winter and be able to have the energy supplies and be able to afford it. But we can't just deal with today's problem. We can't just put a sticking plaster on it. What we need to do is increase our energy supplies long term. And that is why we will open up more supply in the North Sea, which the Honourable Gentleman has opposed. That is why we will build more nuclear power stations, which the Labour Party didn't do when they were in office. And that is why we will get on with delivering the supply as well as helping people through the winter.
Well, it's interesting, this argument now. So basically, we're going to end up in a place where Liz Truss is going to do the thing she said she wouldn't do, which is to freeze bills, which is what the Labour Party said after the Lib Dems said it, after Martin Lewis said it. But there's now an argument about how you pay for it.
That's right, and that's Labour's plan. I'm told this morning by Labour sources that, they know that there's not a huge amount of political capital to be gained by going, well, we said it first and now you've copied us, no. But what there is going forward for the next 2 years is saying we are on the side of working people and you are on the side of big business and people who can afford to pay, the higher taxes or whatever. And frankly, how do you pay for this? Do you whack these companies that have made all this money, or do you somehow put it onto taxation? Now, Liz Truss, I think, will probably put quite a lot of it onto borrowing. So that argument may not be quite as potent as Labour hopes. But their whole approach from now to the next election is to say we are on the side of, the real people. And while Truss can do these political gimmicks, how she pays for it will reveal who she really is as a politician.
It's really striking that the statement that came out from the Treasury this morning after Kwasi Kwarteng met some people in the city said the government's first priority was to support families and business in their immediate term. The Chancellor was clear this will mean necessary higher borrowing in the short term, which is exactly what she said she was opposed to. And so you end up in this sort of slightly strange situation of the Conservatives being in favour of higher borrowing and the Labour Party saying, well, how are you going to pay for it? Why are you saddling future generations with more debt? Which is the reverse of what we normally see in British politics.
That's right. It's hardly been the reverse of what we've seen over the last year or so. And then, to be fair to Truss, she has her own argument as well. And what she's going to hit Labour with is you're all about just chucking money out of the door now. What you're not interested in is in tackling the long-term problems. And what I'm here to do is to try and sort that out.
Yeah.
So we need to get more supply. We need to not be dependent on Russia. We need to build more nuclear power stations, and we need to open up the North Sea again. And, frankly, that's two questions with a degree of substance, both in the question and the answer. And
And
I
in
think
quite an engaging
therein,
way. They're both, they are holding their audience. They're speaking in clear, full sentences and setting out a case.
yeah, and Labour know that they're going to get more substance from Truss than they got out of
Yeah.
Johnson, and that will affect their own approach as well. But I think some of them hope that plays into Starmer's hands because he's king of the detail as well. And if he can have a genuine argument about the detail of policy, Keir Starmer will be in a more comfortable place than trying to crack jokes about ostriches with Boris Johnson.
Something Stuart's put on the YouTube channel. Someone else on Twitter. So, that was frustratingly sure-footed, which gives something away. Somebody else says, Matt says, did the Tories find that blaming the last Labour government still works for them, despite Labour having been out of power for 12 years? Well, the 12 years thing and attacking what happened before. That's one of the Labour Party's big sort of campaigning laws. Well, let's go back. We'll find out if Keir Starmer picks up on that. It's question number 3 in the House of Commons from Keir Starmer.
Well, I look forward to tomorrow's statement, but the money's got to come from somewhere. And she knows that every single pound in excess profits she chooses not to tax is an extra pound on borrowing that working people will be forced to pay back for decades to come. More borrowing than is needed. That's the true cost of her choice to protect oil and gas profits, isn't it?
Mr. Speaker, the reality is that this country will not be able to tax its way to growth. The way we will grow our economy is by attracting investment, keeping taxes low, delivering the reforms to build projects quicker. That is the way that we will create jobs and opportunities across our country.
Well, that's proper classic conservatism.
I was going to say, I mean, she sounds like a Conservative Prime Minister. Yeah. And whatever else Boris Johnson sounded like at various points, he didn't often sound like a traditional Conservative Prime Minister. And, we're back to, as you say, the terms of the debate are slightly different. For advantage, Labour in the past have not been that averse to borrowing, but, they clearly want to make this point in order to say borrowing hurts the humble voter in the street down the line, which is not the argument the Labour Party normally pursues. But no, that's a straightforward, we'll cut taxes, we'll get an investment, we'll grow, and that's how we'll get more money. It's Ronald Reagan,
and yet,
even more than it is Margaret Thatcher.
Is
actually.
there also a bit of cakeism in this? Because she's saying that I'm both going to do the big state intervention stuff, which I bitterly hated while sitting in the cabinet with Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson, which will cost billions of pounds and leads to massively higher borrowing, while also cutting taxes. So she gets to do the sort of the Thatcherite Reagan, get the government out of your way, keep more of your own money stuff, while also running up massive billions and billions of pounds of borrowing.
Totally, and that's why Rishi Sunak and others think that it's reckless, because they think that you have to make some choices along the line here, and that you either put the huge amount of money in, and if you do, you've got to find a way of paying for it. If you don't, you borrow. There are people who think that will put up inflation and will outweigh the benefits of all the other things that she's doing. But she's taken a calculation that was the best way to win the Conservative leadership election, and that it's the best way to stabilise a very new premiership and have half a chance of winning the next election. All the things are pointing against the Conservative Party in 2024, and Liz Truss is trying to sort of cut through that and hopes that a bit of short, sharp investment and genuinely, releasing business to do some of what it wants to do will help kickstart growth, and that inflation will work its way through the system naturally, and that, by the end of 2023, start of 2024, she can say, look, we've dealt with this, we're on the way back, don't spoil it now by putting the other lot in. And that may be the only play that the Conservative Party has, realistically, at this point. Yeah,
Vanessa's just texted in. Isn't Truss doing what she said you wouldn't, giving with one hand and taking away with the other? Yes, or possibly at the moment, giving with both hands is also one.
I mean, cakeism was Boris Johnson's ultimate, contribution to British politics.
Yeah.
But it would be wrong to suggest that Boris Johnson is the only Prime Minister who has tried cakeism in the past.
Yeah, and actually what she's doing in a way, she's wrapping it up in a more traditional Conservative ideology.
Yes, because
presentationally.
I think, yeah, and also I think her MPs think she believes that and will actually try to do it, whereas Boris Johnson spoke a good game about parts of the Conservative ideology, but most of his ideology was, how do I solve this problem for me between now and next week?
Yeah. Right, let's go back to the House of Commons then. Somebody pointed out, somebody said, is she in a rush? Because she seems to be getting through it. We appreciate that. Short question, short answer. So this is question number 4 from Keir Starmer.
So, Mr. Speaker, her first act as Prime Minister is to borrow more than is needed because she won't touch excess oil and gas profits. On that topic, how much would her planned corporation tax cut hand out to companies?
The right honourable gentleman is looking at this in the wrong way. The last time...
the Commons has suddenly come alive.
Last time we cut corporation tax, we attracted more revenue into the exchequer because more companies wanted to base themselves in Britain, more companies wanted to invest in our country. And if taxes are put up and raised to the same level as France, which is what the current proposal is, and which I will change as Prime Minister, that will put off investors, it will put off those companies investing in our economy, and ultimately that will mean fewer jobs, less growth and less opportunities across our country.
Oh, was that it? Oh, there we are. She sat down again. Again, a big. I mean, this is one for the proper sort of economic wonks. Is there a sweet spot where you raise the maximum amount? Because clearly, if you follow the logic of, well, we cut corporation tax and got more money. But if you keep cutting it, do you keep getting? As the old.
Well, the short answer is no, you don't. And this is the argument Rishi Sunak's people were making, that for the amount of cuts that George Osborne and others made to corporation tax, the amount of investment was actually rather marginal. Yes, there was more, but there wasn't enough more to justify dropping it as low as they had, and that was his point. So Sunak's plan was to raise corporation tax on the profits of large companies whilst providing huge tax breaks for investment. So it'd be interesting to see if Liz Truss wants to specifically incentivise investment in the way that Sunak envisaged. Because his view inside the Treasury was that it wasn't raising enough in terms of investment, and that the biggest problem we have relative to France, Germany, and other comparable countries is that businesses were not investing. Yes, the sort of headline rate of corporation tax can have an impact on whether sort of companies decide to relocate here, but in terms of ones that are here, whether or not they want to put a load of money into long-term planning, there hasn't been the incentive to do that, something more targeted is potentially needed. The other interesting thing here is that while Starmer has a good point here about why aren't you taking some money from these companies that have profited excessively, he's very quickly putting himself in danger of being the sort of anti-business party again, and just will find it very convenient to be the pro-business party in a sort of more traditional fashion than Boris Johnson was.
Somebody's asked on the YouTube channel, is Boris Johnson in the chamber? My guess is not.
I can't see him, and I assume he isn't.
Yes. He's off finishing his book, presumably.
One of his many books. May even be finishing the book he's writing himself.
As well as helping you finish yours. Right, let's go back to the House of Commons then. It's interesting how this is sort of panning out. Keir Starmer asking a series of sort of technical questions. How much did this raise? How much would this save? At some point he might mount this into a sort of an argument which gets him on the news tonight, and hopefully in the papers tomorrow, because of Liz Truss making it, confirming she is going to make the statement to the House tomorrow on what she's planning to do with energy bills. Let's go back to the House of Commons now. This is number 5 from Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, it's extraordinary that not only is the Prime Minister refusing to extend the windfall tax, she's also choosing to hand the water companies polluting our beaches a tax cut. She's choosing to hand the banks a tax cut. She's choosing to hand the banks a tax cut. Add it all together, and companies that are already doing well are getting a £17 billion tax cut, while working people pay for the cost of living crisis, stroke victims wait an hour for an ambulance, and criminals walk the streets with impunity. Families and public services need every penny they can get. How on earth does she think that now is the right time to protect Shell's profits and give Amazon a tax break?
I'm on the side of people who work hard and do the right thing. That is why we will reverse the national insurance increase, and that is why we will keep corporation tax low. Because ultimately, we want investment right across our country. We want new jobs and new opportunities. And that is what I will deliver as Prime Minister.
It's starting to get a bit more lively in the House of Commons with a big sort of battle of ideas there.
And I thought Truss might respond to sort of NHS stuff about hospitals, because the plan apparently is for some big announcement early next week on how they deal with the backlog and all that sort of thing. And that, one of the reasons why Theresa Coffey, her closest ally and Deputy Prime Minister, has gone to health is because they know that's a major issue, and she wants someone she can trust there and someone who's going to have the clout to get things done. I thought she might have pointed that out there. But you're beginning, and I suspect we're going to see this for many, many months now, to have a sort of slight dialogue of the deaf, where Starmer's concerns are, and Truss is like, that's the wrong way to look at it. We need growth, and I suspect, while it's exciting to hear these arguments for the first time, let's tune in next April and see whether we're still doing the same, people talking past each other.
You cannot tax your way to growth, I think. This is probably a phrase we're going to hear a lot about. I mean, Keir Starmer's starting to sort of pull together an argument that will resonate with people. Stroke victims waiting in ambulances, criminals walking the streets with impunity. Families and public services need every penny they can get. The thing about Shell's profits and giving Amazon a tax break, all that will resonate with people who are really feeling the squeeze. This is like the thing about her saying she wants to cut the national insurance rise, as put forward by Rishi Sunak. Something that doesn't ever seem to get talked about is that Rishi Sunak did row back on that. He moved the thresholds, didn't he? So that actually,
well, the people at the low end had almost no impact.
Yeah,
but this is again, this is one of my bugbears in politics, where politicians muck about with thresholds and never get any credit for it. What people understand are headline rates, and a lot of people who aren't getting a national insurance rise still think they are.
Yeah. But so he announced a national insurance rise, which everyone would have to pay for. And then following some political kickback, as part of his energy package, he announced he was changing the threshold so the people at the bottom wouldn't pay it. She's now planning to reverse the original thing, but still spend that £13 billion, but not on the NHS backlog, but on social care.
Yeah.
If you can follow that at home, well done, everyone. Right, this is PMQs Unpacked. It's on Times. I'm still joined by Tim Shipman, the chief political commentator of the Sunday Times, where we pause the action live from the House of Commons. We'll bring you the best of the rest on the back benches. But first, this is when they both have an opportunity. This will be the clip that they're both trying to get on the telly. It's Keir Starmer and Liz Truss. So let's go back. Question number 6 from the Labour leader, Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister claims to be breaking orthodoxy, but the reality is she's reheating George Osborne's failed corporation tax plans, protecting oil and gas profits and forcing working people to pay the bill. She's the 4th Tory Prime Minister in 6 years. The face at the top may change, but the story remains the same. There is nothing new about the Tory fantasy of trickle-down economics. Nothing new about this Tory Prime Minister who nodded through every single decision that got us into this mess and now says how terrible it is. And can't she see there's nothing new about a Tory Prime Minister who, when asked who pays, says it's you, the working people of Britain.
So let's just jump in there before we hear her response. This is the new slogan from the Labour Party. They are determined not to repeat what happened with Boris Johnson, where Boris Johnson managed to create the idea in the public's mind that he was entirely new and had
look at my brand new government.
Nothing to do with what came before Theresa May and David Cameron. They are determined to hammer home the point that Liz Truss, as the longest continuously serving cabinet minister of this government, she's been there longer than anyone else without a break, that there is nothing new about her.
Yep. The face may change, but the story remains the same. And then he goes off and starts talking about trickle-down economics, which is a rather more niche point, which is to do with Reaganomics.
One for the political salons rather than the TV.
Yeah, that's a sort of desperate attempt to please both the Daily Mirror and the New Statesman in one little attack. And then, nodded through every single decision. Well, actually, Liz Truss didn't nod through a lot of these decisions. She was moaning vociferously about them in
Well,
private.
I suppose you could. At what point are you so cross about all these things you're now planning to reverse that you may well have considered resigning, possibly?
Indeed.
Right. Well,
Perfectly fair point. Well,
let's see what Liz Truss has got to say in response. How does she convince the public that she is something new?
Well, there's nothing new about a Labour leader who is calling for more tax rises.
Keir Starmer doesn't look very happy about that quite sharp comeback.
Same old tax and spend. What I'm about is about reducing taxes, getting our economy growing, getting investment, getting new jobs for people right across the country. I'm afraid to say the right honourable gentleman doesn't understand aspiration. He doesn't understand opportunity. He doesn't understand that people want to keep more of their own money. And that is what I will deliver as Prime Minister. I will take immediate action to help people with their energy bills, but also secure our long-term energy supply. I will take immediate action to make sure we have lower taxes and we grow the economy. And that way, I will ensure we have a positive future for our country and we get Britain moving.
Quite sharp, clever. I mean, I assume she might have had up her sleeve her comeback, but to throw his language back at him shows that she can think on her feet.
Nothing new about a Labour leader calling for more tax rises. I mean, a little shout out to the backroom crews here. I mean, one of the shrewdest people in her team is a chap called Jason Steen, who is in charge of prepping her for Prime Minister's questions, who helped her turn her debate performances around, which helped her win the leadership. She will put more effort into prep for PMQs than Boris Johnson did, who quite often
let us not forget,
turned up and winged it.
A normal PMQs day, the number 10 machine starts thinking about it on Tuesday. They spend all of Wednesday morning doing it. She's been putting together a cabinet, doing the reshuffle, taking calls from world leaders, chairing a cabinet meeting this morning. The actual amount of time she's had to spend on this is pretty limited.
Certainly less than Starmer, you would imagine. And go back to where we began this, Matt. Labour MPs would leave that thinking Starmer did a pretty decent job of speaking up for the people they want to speak up for. But Tory MPs were cock-a-hoop with that line about tax rises. And they will go away thinking, OK, she's got something. And if we didn't support her, she's shown that she's got a bit of fight in her. And I think on balance, they will be marginally happier as a result of today than on the other side of the House.
One very niche point, her repeating at the end her line on the energy bills, and I'm determined to, help people, and I'm immediate priority and all of that. Putting all of that together into one hit, it's good for the social media.
It's very good.
It would get clip. She could have thought, well, I've already done all that.
She got her chair in the chamber, and she still got her bullet points across.
Ended on the bullet
for the
points again.
Exactly.
Which is really, in terms of communicating.
Be very surprised if we don't see that whole last answer on the 6 o'clock and 10 o'clock news this evening.
Which if you hadn't done that may well have got a bit lost. It suggests that there is a really concerted effort to try and communicate these things. Right, it's Matt Chorley on Times Ready, bringing you PMQs Unpacked. We're not going to bring you we've dropped the news because we've got so much to bring you. We're going to basically work our way through as many of the questions and exchanges as we possibly can, which we kick off with it. To the delight of the nation, we will kick off with the SNP leader in Westminster, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure the thoughts and prayers of everyone in this House will be with the families that were caught up in the terrible shooting over recess in Kyle and McCalsh, and indeed in Liverpool as well, and we trust that the families will be fully supported. Mr. Speaker, let me congratulate the Prime Minister and her family on her appointment. But I'm sorry to say that her reputation for straight talking has fallen apart at the first PMQs. After 9 questions, she's still not told us who will pay for her energy plan. Prime Minister, today the public are waiting to find out the response to the economic crisis, and they want answers. So, will the Prime Minister finally answer 2 very simple questions? Will she freeze energy prices at their current levels? And will it be paid for by a windfall tax? Yes or no?
I think we know the answer, but let's hear it anyway.
No, it won't be paid for by a windfall tax. I don't believe we can tax our way to growth. And what I want to see is I want to see us using more of our UK energy supply, including more oil and gas from the North Sea and nuclear power in Scotland as well. And I hope I can count on the SNP's support for that.
OK, let's go back to Ian Blackford again for his follow-up.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I say that on her first full day as Prime Minister, she has failed to rule out...
Shh, let's hear the next question.
Lindsay Hoyle there, getting in on the action.
The Prime Minister may have changed, Mr Speaker, but it's the same old being shouted down by the Tories. On her first full day as Prime Minister, she's failed to rule out a Truss tax on household and businesses, instead of targeting the profits of massive corporations with a windfall tax. The Prime Minister's plan appears to be a decade-long raid on the bank accounts of ordinary taxpayers. These costs must not be passed on to consumers and businesses by deferring bills. Government must announce an enhanced windfall profits tax, making sure that those oil and gas producers pay their fair share from excess profits. Does the Prime Minister understand that her first act as Prime Minister will now define her? A Truss tax that household and businesses will be paying for years to come.
Well, I'm not quite sure what the right honourable gentleman's position is, because on one hand, he doesn't seem to want oil and gas extraction from the North Sea, and on the other hand, he wants them to pay more taxes. Why does he make up his mind?
Right, let's have a conversation about whether or not the phrase Truss tax is going to take off beyond SNP Twitter.
I don't know. I thought it was a frost tax. I might have misheard.
It was a bit mumbled the first time, so he had another go a bit later on. I mean, essentially just repeating the position of Keir Starmer, with the added complication of the SNP's slightly seesawing relationship with the coal and the gas and oil industry.
Indeed. They sort of say, well, it's all Scottish. Why does England have any of it?
Yes.
And then they say, but we don't want any of it brought out of the ground because it's environmentally damaging.
But we do
want them to pay huge profit
we do want to
taxes.
tax them because that's going to bankroll in independent Scotland, but we shouldn't be taxing them because we shouldn't be getting anything from them. Anyway.
Ephemeral aside, but Ian Blackford admitting that the Tories shouting at him disturbs him. It's a little bit curious. I've always had the impression Blackford rather likes to cut and thrust, but same old Tories being rude to me when I try to speak. Just a little sense that they've got to him a bit.
I suspect because we've talked before about the strange bromance between him and Boris Johnson. They quite liked needling each other.
Yeah, they sort of liked having the other
as fattest.
It was the person you loved to hate, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, there's no love lost there, I don't think. Well, talking of Prime Ministers, not Boris Johnson this time. We'll go one back. Another former Prime Minister is in the chamber. This was Theresa May asking Liz Truss a question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. May I congratulate my right honourable friend and welcome her to her position as the third female
the mention of a female Prime Minister.
Can I ask my right honourable friend, why does she think it is that all three female Prime Ministers have been Conservative?
I think that's what we call an underarm.
Yes. More, they say, as if they want her back.
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for her fantastic question. I look forward to calling on her advice from her time in office as I start my work as Prime Minister. It is quite extraordinary, isn't it, that there doesn't seem to be the ability in the Labour Party to find a female leader, or indeed a leader who doesn't come from North London. I don't know what it is. I don't know what the issue is.
Oh, I thought we could have had some more wigs, or she sat down again.
So many more.
Well, there we are. I mean, it's a good point. Keir Starmer, North London. Jeremy Corbyn, North London. Ed Miliband, North London. Tony Blair, North London. Gordon Brown, the only one who broke the trend.
Yeah, that didn't go so well, does it? I mean, the question's obviously a softball, but intriguing that Theresa May already seems to be sort of saying, I'm prepared to be helpful here in a way that she absolutely
Very
never was
good
with
point.
Boris Johnson. And Truss kind of responding in kind, saying she'd take advice from her. I mean, I used to take great pleasure in phoning contacts in Downing Street under Johnson's tenure and ask, whether he was consulting former prime ministers. Has he had a chat with Dave? Occasionally he'd had a chat with Dave, very, very, very rarely. Boris Johnson did not like taking advice from David Cameron, and he certainly never picked up the phone to Theresa May to get her views on anything. So that's an intriguing little, subplot for the next couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, it was notable, wasn't it, that David Cameron tweeted support for Theresa May when she faced a vote of no confidence, didn't do the same for Boris Johnson. It'd be interesting to know what's going on if David, because obviously Liz Truss began life as a sort of ultimate Cameroon, came in on the A-list, rose through the ranks on his watch. He promoted her very early to ministerial office.
Yeah, she was the first of that kind of gang to get into the cabinet in 2012, and has been there ever since. Though more of an Osborneite than a Cameroon, I think.
But part of that, that world,
part of the set,
project.
Yes.
In fact, George Osborne's been very positive and supportive of her.
Yeah, and she's still quite close to George Osborne. I think they still talk, it was even suggested to me a few months ago that if George wants another job at some point, it might not be impossible to imagine him returning.
Well, that was the one thing when we were playing fantasy reshuffles. It's been a while since we've had a Peter Mandelson being plucked out of the darkness.
Well, I think, that Peter Mandelson returned when Gordon Brown was at his lowest ebb. Here's a cheeky tenner now, so you can clip it and play it back.
Yeah,
but if by next summer things are looking a bit dodge, don't be surprised if, the next leader of the House of Lords is George Osborne, or the next Foreign Secretary sitting in the House of Lords is George Osborne.
Well, it was Peter Mandelson was business secretary, wasn't he?
He was.
First Secretary of State. Right, we'll clip that up. That's going in the archive. Maggie says she's tough, this lady. Well, the message says she's tough, this lady, Maggie. I don't know if that's from Maggie or just a comment on who Liz Truss is like. And then somebody else says, Truss tax, love it. So keep those observations coming in. Let's hear now from SNP MP Hannah Bardell.
According to the Prime Minister's new Deputy Prime Minister, one of the things that qualified her most for being PM and was one of her greatest achievements was the reintroduction of beavers. Now, I'm all for the beavers, but given her flip-flopping on Brexit and given her inability to understand global affairs, how can constituents like mine, like Waz Abbas, whose energy prices are going to go from £7,000 to £37,000 a year, or Broadtext in Livingston, who are going to go from £50,000 to £250,000 a month, have any faith that she can tackle the oncoming humanitarian crisis? Is she going to come out of her den in number 10 and take real action, or is she going to be as useless and corrupt as her predecessor, who's rocketed off to somewhere in the Pacific?
Corrupt's a bit strong. I wonder what Lindsay Hall thinks about that.
I am determined to tackle the issues we face in energy, and I look forward to the Scottish Government playing their part by building new nuclear power stations.
Can I just say, I want a nice opponent, that was not a good example. I certainly don't want to use corrupt being used against the new Prime Minister. And I'm sure the honourable member... Just...
I think our point is it was about the previous Prime Minister.
Will withdraw it. Just withdraw the comment.
Sometimes the truth hurts, but I'm happy to withdraw it.
Right.
Right, indeed. I can only assume that Hannah Bardell made that beaver joke innuendo as some sort of bet.
Well, possibly. I don't think it... it was sufficiently sort of strange that it didn't have the desired effect, I think. Short of everybody messaging me beaver klaxon on my, members of Parliament literally writing beaver klaxon in my my WhatsApp messages, which is obviously always amusing. I remember once asking Boris Johnson about his quest to protect the endangered beaver, and he began his reply with enthusiast for the beaver as I am, and the special advisor hung his head in shame. No, I'm not sure what she was intending there, but it was one of those ones that was just more weird than penetrating.
Yeah, I think, and the result wasn't much different. The main thing being that Lindsay Hall said you can't call Boris Johnson corrupt in the House of Commons. Right, that's here. We continue PMQs Unpacked. Let's hear now from the Labour MP, Rachel Hopkins.
The new Prime Minister tells us she will deliver on the NHS. Well, that's a turn up for the books, because after 12 years of Conservatives driving our NHS into the ground, we have record waiting lists, people dying in ambulances outside A&E, and nurses using food banks. So given the Prime Minister has served in the past 3 Conservative governments on that watch, can she explain why we should trust her to deliver?
I mean, I don't agree with the way she is talking down our National Health Service. The fact is that our health service did brilliantly in tackling COVID, in delivering the vaccine rollout, and in getting this country back on its feet. But we do face challenges now with the backlog following COVID. And this is why the new Health Secretary is going to work to address those challenges.
Serve me right.
I mean, that's the big problem that Liz Truss is going to face over the coming years and months and years, isn't it? Is that the problems stored up by 12 years of government have all happened, you could argue, on her watch in one way or another.
Yeah, that's true. And then she inherits, a situation where COVID has exacerbated every problem that there ever was. And she doesn't have very long to turn things around before the next election. And that's a big systemic structural problem for the government. And Labour, it hasn't always worked. In fact, it often hasn't always worked. But, Labour's favourite attack on a Tory government is always you're letting down the health service. And it's quite an easy attack to make at the moment.
And the British relationship with the NHS is so weird, because on the one hand, it's this great national religion, which, you're not allowed to talk down in the words of Liz Truss. On the other hand, it's people share their horror stories all the time. They sort of love the NHS in the theory, and in the practice they complain they can't get a GP appointment, which is why she talked about that on the steps of number 10. Everyone's got a story about a loved one in the back of an ambulance who can't get into hospital, or people worried that they might have to call an ambulance, they can't get to hospital, the long waiting lists and all of that. And that sort of slightly sort of double-headed view of the NHS is going to be. She needs to sort of address both of them, doesn't she?
It's very difficult for a Conservative leader because most of them in private believe that a lot of it doesn't work very well. If it was such a great way of paying for your healthcare, a single other country in the world would have copied it, and none of them have. I think the Qataris copied it for a while and then changed their minds and went in a different direction. And even extremely left-wing countries and ones that are comparable with us, the French is a much more left-wing country. France is a much more left-wing country than Britain. They've got, a public system allied with insurance. And, the second a Conservative Prime Minister mutters the word insurance, everybody goes mad.
Yeah. But the Labour Party will accuse the Tories of privatising the NHS at every election. And at some point, you assume they might get around to it if that was their intention. Right, we've got one more question then. This is Conservative MP Jeremy Wright.
Speaker, I congratulate my right honourable friend on her appointment and recognise her determination to address the many urgent and difficult challenges that face us now. But would she accept that one of those challenges is an almost entirely unregulated online space? And would she accept, too, that no responsible government can avoid the need for excellent, balanced, sensible regulation in this space? And would she therefore assure me that the online safety bill will come back to this House swiftly for us to consider further and amend if necessary?
Well, I can assure my honourable friend that we will be proceeding with the online safety bill. There are some issues that we need to deal with. What I want to make sure is that we protect the under-18s from harm, but we also make sure free speech is allowed. So there may be some tweaks required, but certainly he is right that we need to protect people's safety online.
Just remind people who don't know, this online safety bill it's been quite hotly contested even within the Tory party, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. It was a big debate during the contest, and a lot of people were desperate to get themselves to be made culture secretary so they could go and tear it to bits. Cami Badenoch was one of them. Liz Truss herself, I think, thinks it has been overdrawn and it's a bit too restrictive and it impinges on freedom of speech. And having Nadine Dorries leaving the culture department allows them to do some tweaks like that. Though the fact that Truss offered her the job to start with suggests she doesn't think it's probably anything that radical. And, Jeremy Wright is a former Culture Secretary, he's a former Attorney General, so he understands the law and he understands the issues. I thought that was an interesting question because as he began it, I thought, this is the first sign of dissent and the first sign of, a bit of angst on the back benches and saying Truss is going in the wrong direction. But I think the way he framed it was very much, get it back in here and we can address these issues and make some tweaks if necessary. And she basically embraced that. So it wasn't really the confrontational question I thought it might be at the beginning of his words. But it does show there's quite a lot of feeling on it. And what they don't want to see is this bill punted into the long grass because of problems about freedom of speech, when there's quite a lot of important stuff in it about protecting young people from the horrors online.
And just a reminder that when you are the Prime Minister, all of this stuff comes back to you in the end. The easy decisions are made by junior ministers, cabinet ministers, but the difficult stuff ends up on your desk.
And I think perhaps more than Boris Johnson, Liz Truss has an opinion on a lot of those things.
Yes.
She does sort of pay an interest and has thought about a lot of these issues and has probably a firmer position than he did on a lot of slightly more obscure things. But everything's there. That's what's, that Prime Minister, she'll have walked to that dispatch box with an enormous folder with hundreds and hundreds of tabs in it, things that she might get asked about.
Yeah.
And
actually today equipped herself pretty well.
Yeah, I think the Tory benches will be very content with that, to be honest.
Loads and loads of comments on the YouTube channel. My favourite being, this is a pretty dull PMQs, quite refreshing. Someone else Martin says, I'm no Tory, but this PMQs is refreshing after 3 years of Johnson nonsense. A sign of things to come. At least they're having a discussion about policy and what might actually happen in the country.
Yeah, be careful what you wish for, Matthew. I'd like the old ostrich gag to keep us going.
Mind, yeah. If once a month, Keir Starmer could turn up with his
Wheel out
Star Wars joke book. I think, in fact, we can find out how it's gone down in the Commons now and go live to Charlotte Ivers, our political correspondent, who's in Westminster. How do you think that went down in the room, Charlotte? What was happening that we couldn't see on the cameras?
I thought that was rather interesting, to be honest, Matt, because it's the first time I've been in a big room full of MPs this week and there was a proper atmosphere. It actually felt like something big was happening. It's been weirdly subdued, and I think possibly having the opposition in the room allowed Conservative MPs to really start rallying together and start getting their spirit of fight back. Even the ones who had been telling me earlier in the week, this is a terrible thing for the party, we're all in big trouble now, we've lost the next election. They were all up there roaring, cheering, particularly delighted to be able to rub in the fact that they've had 3 female prime ministers and Labour have had none. And then the same level of annoyance and frustration coming back from the Labour Party, really. It was a proper atmosphere and actually a proper ideological debate, which we haven't really seen for a while in Prime Minister's Question Time.
Just to confirm, because somebody asked a question earlier, Boris Johnson wasn't there?
Don't think he was, no. He may have been lurking in the back somewhere, but I couldn't see him.
No, can you see any of the others? Rishi Sunak, Grant Shapps, the big people have been sacked?
You know what? This is really bad. I was actually sat on the side where I can mainly see the Labour benches. So I can tell you who's there from Labour to a man, but I'm a little bit more rusty on the Conservative side. Obviously, Theresa May was there and she asked a question. That was a really interesting one because she asked a very, very soft question. Isn't the Prime Minister pleased that we've had 3 Conservative female prime ministers? And obviously, given what a thorn in the side she was of Boris Johnson's, I think that will be a big relief for Liz Truss to have such a lovely softball question as her first one.
Yeah, exactly right. Given all the trouble that she caused Boris Johnson. Charlotte, really good to speak to you. Let get off and lurk in quiet corners in the Houses of Parliament. Charlotte, I was there, our political correspondent down in Westminster. Tim, what your plans for the rest of the week?
I've got to try and get to the bottom of what's really been going on behind that big black door. And once they've announced the energy thing, how did they get there? As ever, I will attempt to bring you the juicy morsels that have escaped my daily colleagues.
And who are the people, not necessarily the new Dominic Cummings, because he's become quite the minor celebrity, but who's the most powerful person we haven't heard of, who's in behind the scenes in the Truss operation?
Well, the comms team is always going to be important. We wait to see what stamp Mark Fulbrook, the Chief of Staff, will make on Whitehall. Mark is someone who is a campaigner, someone who spent most of his time helping MPs get elected. He's not someone who has vast experience of dealing with the civil service. And there was an interesting thing this morning when the cabinet photograph was put out that there were only civil servants in the room. And I think a lot of political advisors on the communications side and on the sort of political operation in Number 10, who, if they don't find themselves sitting in that meeting, are going to find that they unable to do their jobs properly. So it'd be very interesting to see if that continues.
Well, we always hear about restoring cabinet government, stopping off the record briefings, a slimmer state, which actually.
But one of the reasons you need the comms team in there is because if ministers start mouthing off and bigging themselves up, you need someone who's able to say, well, actually, that version that you've been told is not strictly correct.
Exactly.
And Liz Truss, whisper it quietly, will know all about that. Because, saying nothing from my behalf, but I know that Robbie Gibb, who was the communications director for Theresa May, had Liz Truss at the top of his list of cabinet leakers. Now, it may be that Liz Truss thinks her own political team are going to leak against her, but if she thinks the civil servants in the room are going to be the ones acting as a Praetorian Guard for her, she's going to be in for a rude shock. I suspect by this time next week that will have all changed. But as ever, a new regime goes in. They like to do things differently. Quite a lot of them announce that they're going to do things differently in the same way that everybody else announced they were going to do things differently, and then they all end up doing it back the way we've always done it, because at some perverse level, I know the public doesn't think so, but broadly speaking, it does work.
Tim Shipwood, lovely to see you, Chief Political Commentator of the Sunday Times. Well worth a read this weekend. Well, it's every weekend.
We hope so, anyway.
Well, we hope so. Well, I'll pick it up now. It's up to you to make sure it's worth it. Lovely to see you. We'll do PMQs Unpacked again next week. Up next, though, we'll do the quiz here on Times Radio.